The thunder of hooves announced Garrett O'Malley's arrival before Trinity Adams could even see him. She stood on the porch of her father's general store in Crimson Creek, Colorado, watching as the dust cloud approached from the horizon. It was 1874, and news traveled faster by horse than by telegram in these parts. Something was wrong. Garrett never rode that hard unless there was trouble. Trinity's heart quickened as she recognized his chestnut stallion. At 22, she had known Garrett for nearly 5 years, ever since he'd arrived in town to work at her father's ranch. He was only 3 years her senior, but carried himself with the weathered confidence of a man who had seen more of life than most twice his age. "Garrett," she called out, lifting her skirt slightly as she rushed down the steps. "What's happened?" He pulled the horse to a stop, dust billowing around them. His face was grim beneath his worn Stetson, but he managed a tight smile. "Trouble at the North Ridge, Miss Adams. Your pa asked me to fetch you. The Hollister gang's been spotted near our cattle." Trinity's father, Henry Adams, had built the largest cattle operation in the county. The Hollisters were notorious rustlers who'd been terrorizing ranches across 3 territories. "Let me get my things," Trinity said, turning toward the store. "No time," Garrett replied, extending his hand. "Your pa needs everyone now." Without hesitation, Trinity took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him against the cool autumn air. This wasn't the first time they'd ridden together, but something about the urgency of the moment made her hold on tighter than usual. As they galloped toward the North Ridge, Trinity could feel Garrett's tension in every muscle. They'd always maintained a proper distance. She was the boss's daughter, after all, but there had been moments, glances that lingered too long, conversations by the corral that stretched into the evening hours. Nothing spoken, but enough to make her wonder, how many? She asked against his ear, the wind stealing her words almost immediately. "At least 8 that we could count," he called back. "Your pa's gathered the hands, but we're still outnumbered." The North Ridge came into view, and Trinity could see the dust rising from what must have been nearly 100 head of cattle being driven toward the pass. If the rustlers got them through there, the cattle would be gone for good. Her father and 5 ranch hands had positioned themselves at the narrow entrance to the pass. The Hollisters hadn't spotted them yet. Garrett slowed the horse as they approached, helping Trinity down before dismounting himself. Her father strode toward them, rifle in hand. "Trinity, I need you on the ridge," Henry said without preamble. "You're the best shot among us, and they won't be expecting fire from above." Trinity nodded. Her mother had died when she was 12, and her father had raised her to be as capable as any man on the ranch. She could ride, shoot, and round up cattle with the best of them. "Garrett, you'll go with her," Henry continued. "Keep her safe, but let her do what she needs to." Garrett nodded, his eyes meeting Trinity's. "Always, sir." They climbed the rocky path up the ridge, Garrett leading the way, occasionally reaching back to offer his hand on the steeper sections. Each time their hands met, Trinity felt that same spark that had been building between them for years. At the top, they found a position with a clear view of the pass and the approaching rustlers. Garrett handed Trinity her father's spare Winchester rifle. "I've got 6 rounds in my Colt," he said, checking his revolver, "and another dozen in my belt. You?" "10 in the rifle, and I've got my Remington," she replied, patting the smaller revolver in her skirt pocket. Her father had insisted she carry it since she was 16. The Hollisters were getting closer, driving the cattle hard. Trinity could make out 8 riders, just as Garrett had said. She recognized Frank Hollister at the lead, a brutal man with a reputation that made most folks cross the street when he came to town. "Your pa's planning to block the pass," Garrett explained. "When the rustlers realize they're trapped, They'll either surrender or fight. They'll fight, Trinity said grimly. The Hollisters don't surrender, Garrett nodded. That's why we're up here. You take the left flank, I'll cover the right. Wait for your pa's signal. The trap was sprung within minutes. Henry and his men emerged from their hiding places, blocking the pass with rifles raised. The cattle, already agitated, began to mill about in confusion. Frank Hollister shouted orders to his men, and Trinity could see them reaching for their weapons. Now, Garrett whispered as her father fired a warning shot into the air. Trinity took aim at the closest rustler, not aiming to kill but to disarm. Her first shot caught the man in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. Garrett's shot found another target, and suddenly the air was filled with gunfire. The Hollisters scrambled for cover, returning fire. Trinity methodically worked her way through her targets, forcing the rustlers to keep their heads down while her father and the ranch hands advanced. She was so focused on the men below that she nearly missed the movement to her right. A ninth rustler, hidden until now, was making his way up the ridge toward them. "Garrett," she called out, swinging her rifle around. He turned just as the rustler fired. Garrett dove toward Trinity, knocking her to the ground as the bullet whistled over their heads. He rolled to his feet in one fluid motion, drawing his revolver and firing twice. The rustler fell back, clutching his leg. "You all right?" Garrett asked, his breath coming hard as he helped Trinity to her feet. "Fine," she managed, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Good eyes." "Been watching your back a long time, Miss Adams," he replied with a quick smile that made her heart skip. Below them, the battle was turning in their favor. 2 of the Hollisters were down, and the others were retreating. Frank Hollister, seeing his advantage lost, was trying to escape with as many cattle as he could still control. Trinity took aim again, this time at Hollister himself. She didn't want to kill him, the law should deal with men like him, but she couldn't let him escape either. She squeezed the trigger, aiming for his horse. The shot went wide as the ground beneath her shifted. The earlier gunfire had loosened some of the rocks, and Trinity felt herself sliding toward the edge of the ridge. Garrett lunged for her, catching her arm and pulling her to safety. "Careful there," he said, his voice rough with concern. For a moment, they stood too close, his hand still gripping her arm. Trinity could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow from a ranch accident 2 summers ago. She knew his face as well as she knew her own. A shout from below broke the moment. Frank Hollister had seen them on the ridge and was taking aim. Garrett pushed Trinity behind a boulder just as the shot rang out. They heard the bullet strike rock nearby. "He's getting away," Trinity said, peering around the boulder. Garrett checked his revolver. "Not for long. Your pa and the boys have him cornered." Indeed, Henry and the ranch hands had closed in, trapping Hollister against the base of the ridge. The outlaw was firing wildly, desperate to break through. "We need to get down there," Garrett said, already moving toward the path. "Stay behind me." They made their way down the rocky slope as quickly as they could. By the time they reached level ground, the shooting had stopped. Frank Hollister sat on the ground, clutching his shoulder, surrounded by Trinity's father and the ranch hands. The other rustlers had either been captured or had fled. "You two all right?" Henry called out as they approached. "We're fine, Pa," Trinity replied. "That last rustler nearly got the drop on us, but Garrett spotted him in time." Henry nodded approvingly at Garrett. "Good work, son. I knew I could count on you to keep my girl safe." Garrett ducked his head, but Trinity caught the pleased look that crossed his face. "Just doing my job, sir." "Well, your job just earned you a promotion," Henry said. "I've been needing a new foreman since old Jim retired. The position's yours if you want it." Trinity watched Garrett's expression shift from surprise to pride. I'd be honored, Mr. Adams. Good, that's settled then, Henry said, turning his attention back to the captured rustlers. We'll take these fellas into town. The sheriff can sort them out. As her father organized the men, Trinity found herself alone with Garrett for a moment. Congratulations, Foreman O'Malley, she said with a smile. Thank you, Miss Adams, he replied, his voice warm. Though I reckon it'll take some getting used to. You've earned it, she said sincerely. Pa's been watching you for a while. Says you've got the best head for ranching he's seen in years. Something shifted in Garrett's eyes then, a decision being made. Trinity, he began, using her given name for perhaps the first time. There's something I've been meaning to, Trinity. Garrett, Henry's voice cut through the moment. Need you over here, Garrett sighed, the moment broken. Later, he promised, his eyes holding hers for a heartbeat longer before they both turned to help with the captured rustlers. The sun was setting by the time they returned to the ranch, the rustlers securely bound and loaded onto a wagon for the journey to town. Trinity's father and 3 of the hands would escort them, while Garrett and the others stayed behind to tend to the cattle. I'll be back by midday tomorrow, Henry told them as he prepared to leave. Garrett, you're in charge. Make sure the herd's settled after all this excitement. Yes, sir, Garrett replied. He stood beside Trinity as they watched the wagon pull away, the captured Hollisters grumbling and cursing under their breath. They got what was coming to them, Trinity said, crossing her arms against the evening chill. Garrett nodded. Your pa will see them locked up for a good long time. He glanced at her, concern in his eyes. You should get some rest. It's been a long day. I'm not tired, she said, though the adrenaline that had carried her through the afternoon was beginning to fade. I think I'll check on the herd first. I'll come with you, Garrett offered immediately. They rode out together as twilight deepened into night. The cattle had calmed and were grazing peacefully, showing little sign of their earlier distress. Trinity and Garrett patrolled the perimeter, the comfortable silence between them broken only by the occasional lowing of a cow or the distant cry of a coyote. You were impressive today, Garrett said finally, guiding his horse alongside hers. Not that I'm surprised. You've always been the most capable person on this ranch. Trinity felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the exertion of the day. You weren't so bad yourself, O'Malley. That was quick thinking with the rustler on the ridge. He shrugged, though she could see his pleased expression even in the dim light. I wasn't about to let anything happen to you. The way he said it soft, almost reverent, made Trinity's breath catch. She'd had suitors before, mostly sons of local merchants or neighboring ranchers, but none of them had ever made her feel the way Garrett did with just a few simple words. What were you going to say earlier? She asked, remembering the interrupted moment after the battle. Before Pa called us over. Garrett was quiet for so long that Trinity wondered if he'd heard her. Then he reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her directly. I was going to say that your father's promotion means something more to me than just a better job, he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. It means I might finally have a position worthy of asking for something I've wanted for a long time. Trinity's heart began to race. And what might that be? The chance to court you properly, he said simply. If you'd allow it. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Trinity had imagined this moment countless times, but the reality of it here under the vast Colorado sky, with the man who had gradually claimed her heart without either of them acknowledging it, left her momentarily speechless. I understand if you need time to consider, Garrett added, misinterpreting her silence. Or if you'd prefer not to, yes. Trinity interrupted, finding her voice at last. Yes, I would allow it, very much so. The smile that broke across Garrett's face was like sunrise after a long night. He reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, his touch gentle yet sure. "You've had my heart for longer than I care to admit, Trinity Adams," he said softly. "And you've had mine," she replied, squeezing his hand, "though I was beginning to think you'd never notice." He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the night air. "I noticed, just didn't think I had the right to act on it until now." They continued their patrol, hands occasionally brushing as they rode side by side, the newness of their acknowledged feelings adding a sweet tension to every glance and word exchanged. By the time they returned to the ranch, the moon had risen high, casting silver light over the buildings and corrals. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. With her father's blessing, Garrett began courting Trinity properly Sunday dinners, rides into town together, and walks along the creek that gave the town its name. The ranch hands teased them good-naturedly, having watched the two dance around their feelings for years. As autumn deepened toward winter, life settled into a pleasant rhythm. The Hollisters were safely behind bars in Denver, awaiting trial. The ranch was prospering under Henry's leadership and Garrett's capable management. And Trinity found herself falling more deeply in love each day, discovering new facets of the man she thought she had already known so well. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a crisp November morning, delivered by a tired courier who had ridden through the night. The letter bore an official seal that Trinity recognized immediately: the territorial marshal's office. "What is it, Pa?" she asked as her father read the contents, his expression growing more grave with each line. "Frank Hollister escaped during transfer," he said grimly. "Killed 2 deputies in the process. The marshal says he was heard making threats against us specifically." Trinity felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "He blames us for his capture. And for his brother's deaths," Henry added, folding the letter. "The marshal's sending men, but it'll be at least 3 days before they arrive. Until then, we need to be on our guard." The news spread quickly through the ranch. Extra men were posted on watch, and no one rode out alone. Garrett moved into the main house temporarily, sleeping in the front room to provide additional protection. Though the circumstances were dire, Trinity couldn't help feeling a certain comfort in having him so near, hearing his voice as he and her father discussed security plans late into the night. 2 days passed without incident, and Trinity began to hope that perhaps Frank Hollister had fled the territory altogether. On the 3rd morning, she awoke to find Garrett already gone from his makeshift bed in the front room. A note on the table informed her that he and her father had ridden out at dawn to check the western fences. Trinity went about her morning chores, trying to ignore the unease that had settled over the ranch. By midday, when neither her father nor Garrett had returned, she began to worry in earnest. She was just considering saddling her mare to look for them when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her as she recognized her father's bay gelding, followed closely by Garrett's chestnut. As they drew closer, however, she realized something was wrong. Her father was slumped forward in his saddle, and Garrett's shirt was torn and dirty. She ran to meet them as they entered the yard. "What happened?" "Hollister ambushed us at the west fence," her father said grimly, dismounting with a wince. "Shot at us from the trees." "Garrett took a bullet meant for me." Trinity's gaze snapped to Garrett, scanning him for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "Just grazed my side," Garrett said, dismounting carefully. "I'm fine, Trinity. Really." But there was a tightness around his eyes that belied his words, and he moved with unusual stiffness as he handed the reins to a ranch hand. "Let me see," Trinity demanded, reaching for him. "Later," he said, gently catching her hand. "We need to organize the men. Hollister won't stop with one attempt." The next hour was a flurry of activity as every available hand was called in from the pastures. The ranch was effectively put on lockdown, with armed men positioned at key points around the property. Through it all, Trinity kept a close eye on Garrett, noting how he occasionally pressed a hand to his side when he thought no one was watching. Finally, when the immediate security concerns had been addressed, she cornered him in the kitchen. "Let me look at that wound now," she said in a tone that brooked no argument. Garrett sighed but nodded, carefully removing his jacket. "It's just a scratch," he insisted. "The bullet barely caught me." Trinity helped him remove his shirt, gasping softly when she saw the scratch, a deep furrow along his ribs that had soaked half his shirt with blood. "Garrett O'Malley, this is not a scratch," she said, her voice tight with worry. "This needs stitching." He shrugged, wincing at the movement. "Had worse. Just wrap it tight and I'll be fine." Trinity shook her head, already gathering supplies from her father's medicine cabinet. "Sit down and be still." As she cleaned the wound, she could feel Garrett watching her face. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, muscles tensing whenever she touched a particularly sensitive spot. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on her, his bare torso under her hands, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair that had escaped her braid. "Thank you," she said softly as she began to stitch the wound, "for saving my father." "I'd do it again in a heartbeat," Garrett replied, his voice low. "For him, for you, for anyone on this ranch." Trinity tied off the last stitch and began wrapping clean bandages around his torso. "You're a good man, Garrett O'Malley." "Good enough for you?" he asked, catching her hand as she finished with the bandage. "More than good enough," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Better than I deserve, some might say." He shook his head, bringing her hand to his lips. "No, Trinity. You deserve the very best this world has to offer. I'm just grateful you seem to think that includes me." The tenderness of the moment was broken by a shout from outside. Trinity helped Garrett back into his shirt, and they hurried to the front porch where her father was speaking with one of the hands. "Rider spotted heading toward town," the young cowboy reported. "Matched Hollister's description." Henry nodded grimly. "He's probably gone to gather reinforcements." The Hollisters always had friends in low places. "We should warn the town," Trinity said. "Sheriff Wilson needs to know." "I'll go," Garrett volunteered immediately. "Not alone, you won't," Henry replied. "And not with that wound. I'll send Jake and Billy." As her father gave instructions to the two ranch hands, Trinity noticed Garrett swaying slightly beside her. "You need to rest," she said quietly. "That wound took more out of you than you're admitting." "I'm fine," he insisted, but the pallor of his face told a different story. Trinity took his arm firmly. "Come inside. Now." To her surprise, he didn't resist as she led him back into the house and made him lie down on the sofa in the front room. He was asleep almost before his head touched the cushion, his body finally surrendering to the pain and blood loss it had been fighting. Trinity kept watch over him while her father organized the ranch's defenses. As the afternoon waned into evening, Garrett's sleep became fitful, his skin warm to the touch. Concerned, she checked his wound and found the edges red and swollen, the first signs of infection. "Pa," she called, hearing her father's footsteps in the hallway. "I think there's a problem." Henry examined the wound with a frown. "That doesn't look good. The bullet might have carried something into the wound." "He needs a doctor," Trinity said, worry evident in her voice. "Doc Evans is in Denver until next week," Henry replied, "but Mrs. Santiago might help. She knows more about healing than most doctors anyway." Maria Santiago was a widow who lived on the edge of town. Half Mexican and half Ute, she was known for her knowledge of herbal remedies and healing practices from both traditions. "I'll go get her," Trinity decided, already reaching for her shawl. It's too dangerous, her father objected. Hollister's still out there, and Garrett could die if this infection gets worse, she countered. I'll take the back trail through the woods. Hollister won't be watching that route. Henry knew that look in his daughter's eyes, the same determination her mother had shown whenever she'd set her mind to something. "Take my rifle," he said finally, "and be back before full dark." Trinity rode hard through the forest, taking the seldom-used trail that wound behind the ridge. The journey to Mrs. Santiago's cabin normally took nearly an hour, but she made it in 40 minutes, pushing her mare to a pace that left the animal lathered and panting. Maria Santiago listened gravely to Trinity's description of Garrett's wound. "Fever already starting is not good," she said, her accent thickening with concern. "I come now. Bring my medicines." The return journey seemed to take an eternity, though they rode just as swiftly. By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen completely. Trinity's father met them at the door, his expression tight with worry. "He's worse," he said simply, leading them to where Garrett lay on the sofa. Trinity's heart clenched at the sight of him. His face was flushed with fever, his breathing shallow and rapid. When she touched his forehead, his skin burned against her palm. "He said he'd be fine," she whispered, feeling tears prick at her eyes. As if in response to her voice, Garrett stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Trinity," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "Mrs. Santiago is going to help you." He nodded weakly before his gaze drifted to her sleeve. "You're hurt." Trinity looked down and noticed for the first time the dark stain on her arm. "It's nothing," she said, though she couldn't recall injuring herself. "No," Garrett insisted, trying to sit up. "That's blood." As he moved, the blanket covering him shifted, revealing his bandaged side now soaked through with fresh blood. The realization hit Trinity like a physical blow. His wound had reopened, likely during the fever-induced tossing, and he was bleeding badly. "Mrs. Santiago." She called urgently. The older woman was already approaching with her basket of supplies. "I see it," she said calmly. "Help me turn him. Need to clean wound again, then special poultice." Trinity worked alongside Mrs. Santiago, following her instructions precisely as they cleaned, treated and rebandaged Garrett's wound. The older woman brewed a bitter-smelling tea that they managed to get Garrett to drink in small sips. "This will fight fever," Maria explained. "Now we wait." The night stretched endlessly as Trinity kept vigil by Garrett's side. Her father insisted she rest, but she refused to leave, maintaining her post in the chair beside the sofa. Mrs. Santiago dozed in the rocking chair across the room, waking periodically to check Garrett's fever and administer more of her herbal remedies. Sometime in the darkest hours before dawn, Garrett's fever broke. Trinity, who had been dozing despite her best efforts to stay awake, was roused by the feeling of his hand moving in hers. "Water," he rasped. Trinity helped him drink, relief washing through her at the clarity in his eyes. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd," he admitted with a weak smile, "but better than before. The fire's gone." Mrs. Santiago stirred from her chair and came to check his temperature. "Fever broken," she confirmed with satisfaction. "Good strong man will heal now." Trinity thanked her profusely as the older woman gathered her things to leave. "I'll send someone to escort you home," she insisted. "No need," Maria replied with a knowing smile. "Your place is here. My grandson waits for me on the porch. He brought my horse when he heard shooting in town." "Shooting?" Trinity asked, alarmed. "Sheriff caught Hollister trying to gather men at saloon," Maria explained. "Big fight. Sheriff wounded but Hollister dead now. No more danger." The news rippled through the house as Maria departed. Henry confirmed the details after sending one of the hands into town. Frank Hollister had indeed been killed in a shootout with Sheriff Wilson, who had suffered a minor wound, but was expected to recover fully. With the immediate threat eliminated, the tension that had gripped the ranch for days finally began to ease. By noon, Garrett was able to sit up and take some broth, though Trinity insisted he remain on the sofa. "You lost too much blood," she said firmly when he tried to get up. "Another day of rest, at least." "Yes, madam," he replied with a smile that weakened her resolve to be stern with him. Her father observed their interactions with a knowing look. That evening, after making sure Garrett was comfortable for the night, Henry pulled Trinity aside. "That young man would have died for me yesterday," he said quietly, "and I suspect he'd do the same for you without a second thought." "I know, Pa," Trinity replied, her throat tight with emotion. "I've seen the way you two look at each other," Henry continued. "Reminds me of your mother and me, back when we were young and building this place from nothing." Trinity felt tears welling in her eyes. Her father rarely spoke of her mother, the pain of her loss still sharp even after 10 years. "She would have liked him," Henry added, squeezing Trinity's shoulder. "And she would have told me to stop being so protective and let you follow your heart. Are you saying?" "I'm saying that life out here is uncertain, Trinity. When you find something worth holding on to, you shouldn't wait too long to grab it with both hands." With that bit of wisdom delivered, Henry retired to his room, leaving Trinity to consider his words as she checked on Garrett one last time before bed. He was asleep, his breathing deep and even his face peaceful in the lamplight. She allowed herself a moment to simply look at him, to acknowledge the depth of what she felt. "I almost lost you," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. To her surprise, his eyes opened. "But you didn't," he murmured. "I'm still here." Trinity started to pull her hand away, embarrassed to be caught in such an intimate gesture, but Garrett caught it gently. "Don't go," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. She settled beside him, perching on the edge of the sofa. "How are you feeling?" "Better every minute," he replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Especially now," Trinity smiled, warmth spreading through her at his touch. "You scared me, Garrett O'Malley, when I saw all that blood." "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "I didn't want to worry you. Next time you're shot, maybe don't insist it's just a scratch," she admonished gently. "Next time," Garrett's eyebrows rose. "Planning on making a habit of getting me shot, Miss Adams," she laughed softly. "No, but knowing you and your protective instincts, I suspect you'll find some way to put yourself in harm's way again." His expression sobered. "For you or your father, without hesitation." The simple honesty in his words took her breath away. Trinity found herself leaning closer, drawn to him by something deeper than conscious thought. "Trinity," he said softly, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek. "I need to tell you something, and I don't want to wait any longer to say it." "What is it?" she asked, her heart pounding. "I love you," he said simply. "Have for years now. Nearly dying made me realize I can't waste another day without telling you that." Joy blossomed in Trinity's chest, bright and warm. "I love you too, Garrett, more than I knew was possible." The kiss that followed was gentle, mindful of his injury but no less profound for its tenderness. When they finally parted, Trinity rested her forehead against his, unwilling to move away just yet. "Your father might shoot me for that," Garrett murmured. "I doubt it," Trinity replied with a smile. "He just gave me a speech about not waiting to grab happiness with both hands." Garrett's eyes widened. "Did he now?" "He did. And I think I'll take his advice," she said, kissing Garrett again briefly. "But first you need to rest and heal. We have time now." True to her word, Trinity made sure Garrett rested and recovered properly over the next week. As his strength returned, they began planning their future together. By Christmas, Garrett had saved enough to buy a small parcel of land adjoining the Adams ranch, not much, but a start for a place of their own. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside the windows of the ranch house, Garrett formally asked Henry for Trinity's hand. The older man pretended to consider the request seriously before breaking into a broad smile. "Took you long enough to ask," he said, clapping Garrett on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, son, officially this time." They were married the following spring, when the meadows were carpeted with wildflowers. The entire town of Crimson Creek turned out for the celebration, including Sheriff Wilson, fully recovered from his wound, and Mrs. Santiago, who brought a special herbal tonic that she promised would bring the couple good fortune and many children. As Garrett and Trinity danced under the stars on their wedding night, he pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "Remember when I said I was fine, but you knew better?" Trinity nodded, her cheek against his chest where she could hear his heart beating strong and steady. "You were bleeding all over my father's sofa." "Well, I was right in the end," he said, spinning her gently. "I am fine, better than fine, all because you didn't believe me when I said I would be." "I'll never believe you when you say you're fine," she promised with a smile. "I'll always check for myself." "I'm counting on it," he replied, dipping his head to kiss her, "for all the years to come." And so they began their life together on the land they both loved, building a legacy of love and determination that would withstand the tests of time, just as they had weathered that first storm together. When their children and grandchildren later asked about the scar on Garrett's side, they would tell the story of how love and courage had prevailed in the face of danger, and how sometimes the most precious things in life are discovered in the moments we come closest to losing them.